Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots. Bootlicker, shells, desolators, peasants, vassals, peasants, vassals, peasants, vassals, peasants, vassals. I repeat myself. I'm a useful idiot. And today I want to talk about this idea of failed states. And I'm always talking about failed states and U.S. foreign policy as far as creating instability and undermining sovereign states to create failed states and what the advantages are. And someone might say, hey, a useful idiot. You'd think if there was a direct policy by the U.S. of doing this, there'd be a manual for it. Well, guess what? I, a useful idiot, am telling you that there is such a thing, a manual. It's the TC 18-01, Special Forces Unconventional Warfare document. And it is a step-by-step definition of U.S. irregular warfare and unconventional war tactics. The manual demonstrates the pure impunity with which the U.S. operates its foreign policy in order to destabilize and reorder foreign nations around U.S. economic interests. And this document is quoted in this article. It says a step-by-step guide of how to create, manipulate, co-opt, and make use of a country's population, persons of special interest inside and outside the country, organizations that can be used both inside and outside the country, towards a subversion, beginning with manipulating dissent into demonstrations, the polarization of populations, riots and armed insurgencies, and psychological warfare through media, until actual war is fomented. I hope all this sounds familiar in this document. We have, of course, two recent scenarios that this was used in, Libya and Syria. We're going to see this used in Pakistan. We're going to see it used in the rest of North Africa and other areas in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, the same areas I keep talking about. And this technique is used and then used as a pretext for interventions. But think of this. We begin with manipulating dissent into demonstrations. And then it's just that easy to have demonstrations and then have Western-backed snipers and or explosions to instigate more violence. And this creates this polarization of populations, helps create more chaos, creates riots and armed insurgencies. It really encourages these ethnic rivalries like I've talked about before. It doesn't take much to create this sectarian and ethnic violence. If you are a colonial power in the old days or a post-colonial power now, this is a technique you will use. And to make it a little clearer, we have these targets of these irregular warfare operations are those nations labeled as, quote, rogue states, who will not align with U.S. interests, or are semi-compliant states with strategic locations or natural resources. So these are all the countries that we see this technique being used in, and we will see this pattern over and over and over again. And the pattern is even spelled out in this manual, this Special Forces Unconventional Warfare manual for basically creating instability in a state, undermining a state, destabilizing a state, creating chaos, and then reaping the benefits of a world of failed states. So let's look at these phases. There's 7 main phases, and so we can learn to recognize this in country after country. We can decide whether it's happening in Pakistan. We can decide whether it's going to be applied to China. We can decide whether it's being used in Myanmar. We can decide whether it's being used in North Africa. So let's look at them. Phase 1, preparation, the psychological preparation of the population. So that's where the media prints a lot of information, gets available in international press through the same concentrated corporate sources, and governments get together, leak these stories, they're let out on the internet, and then home populations are prepared for what events will be coming. Phase 2, the initial contact. That's where the United States government, intelligence, and special operations collaborate with opposition groups and start laying the groundwork for what will be a insurrection at some point. They filter in money find the expatriates, the potential leaders, military collaborators, whoever they can find, and start working on the groundswell. Phase 3 is infiltration. That's where special forces, CIA, and intelligence operators are all brought in to help work on this new landscape. And Phase 4 is also a special forces operation, and that's after infiltration, is organization. Make sure you have all your ducks in a row so you can get all the right mechanisms and forces in place to create the conditions in the ground for destabilization. And Phase 5 is the buildup. That's where you find more special forces and the groundwork being laid for the final operations. Then Phase 6 is the employment, and that is when combat operations actually start. And that's where you have either explosions, so-called terrorist attacks that are blamed on different ethnic groups, different sectarian groups, or these groups are used as proxies in order to unleash this violence, which involves justifying state response and the state perhaps requiring foreign intervention, that of NATO or the U.S. So, and this could also include black ops, special operations, and like I mentioned earlier, sniping into crowds and creating chaos and creating groundswell. And then Phase 7 is the last phase, and that's transition to a national recontrol, but with a new configuration, and that is the foundations of the country in a shambles, their resources exposed, and a regime change. So there you have it. 7 phases: preparation, initial contact, infiltration, organization, buildup, employment, transition. These are the manuals that are used and as a guideline for intelligence, U.S. foreign policy, military, State Department, CIA, all the rest to create and destabilize countries as a foreign policy, as a military policy, as a preemptive policy. And this is a guise used as a pretext for intervention and supposedly to spread democratic ideals and to fight terrorist and Al-Qaeda elements. But in reality, it's a reordering of states and creating vassal states, proxy armies, and getting access to resources. So there you have it, a step-by-step guide on how to create, manipulate, co-opt, and make use of a country's population, persons of interest inside and outside the country, organizations inside out the country, to create subversion. And then we have the manipulating dissent into demonstrations, crises and chaos created so that the government and interventionists can offer a solution, the polarization of populations, riots, and armed insurgencies, and then actual war. So there it is, the blueprint. We've seen it in Libya and Syria. We're going to see it used again and again as the U.S. implements this foreign policy of failed states worldwide. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.